So we're starting off with gauging the mass shapes and keeping them fairly abstract. At this point, you just want to keep looking between the drawing and the model and kind of abstracting and conceptualizing what you see into like larger shapes. Okay, so I can see that this should be wider. And then at this point, you can start putting the axis point of the face. And that's really important. That's going to describe where the head is tilting and also describe the face in perspective. And this is another great opportunity to abstract essentially the features, because we're just placing everything and describing it as a line. It's incredibly easy to see if it's proportionally off or correct and then make changes immediately. So I'm seeing that the nose needs to be higher up here. Mouth needs to be up here, the chin can come up here. And all of this is really easy to do and to see because I've kept everything so abstract. I'm also checking with the pencil. I'm holding it up to the model to see what the angle of this is. And I'm seeing that I've actually made the angle go down when it actually needs to go up, so I'm going to correct that now. And taking the time at this point to just really be happy with the proportions you have is going to help save you so much time later on, because honestly, these proportions, this is going to set in whether you have the likeness of your model. Because really, the likeness is hugely in the proportion of these features in the proportion of the face. So if you just have that, it doesn't matter how much you then exaggerate things, it'll still look like the sitter. And if you're wondering, well, okay, I need to get the proportion right. How do I gauge the proportions? Is there something magical that I should do? There really isn't. Just keep squint your eyes and just look at the mass. Don't look at the features. Try to ignore that there even are features and look at everything in relation. Like, okay, how much space does it feel like there should be here? How much space does it feel like there should be here? With the nose, it's incredibly easy. Does it feel like the nose is in the center of the face or a little bit lower? And you kind of just go off doing that. And if you keep the drawing really open, it'll be really easy to see if you've gotten those proportions right or no. Okay, I need to tweak this. And you just kind of keep going like that, and eventually you'll just train your eye to see these proportions a little easier. Okay, at this point, I think we can measure the center of the head. I usually like doing that just to make sure that we're not crazy far off. Okay, so I'm gonna measure from down here to the top of the head here. I'm gonna find the center. Okay, so I've checked the center line on the model. And it looks like I need to lower the eyes a little bit. So it's good that we checked that. And sometimes when you measure, you'll realize like, wow, okay, this is super far off. And that's why it's nice to keep everything open and abstract, because it doesn't hurt when you have to change it. Like it's of no consequence to me to change these lines. I haven't invested anything in them. Okay, and then I usually like to compare this measurement, the half point, to the width of the face, just to see if that aligns with anything that might be useful. Okay, and in the model it aligns with the this hairline. So let's see. Okay, that's good. We know that we need to push this hairline a little bit. Okay, and because we lowered the eyes, we now need to essentially re-gauge all the proportions of the face, because before we were basing our proportions to when the eyes were up here, so now we needed to reevaluate. I have a feeling that I would prefer it if the nose was lower. So I'm just gonna reduce this and readjust the proportions. So keep looking on the model and see, and just kind of like ingrain in your eyes what these proportions are. And then go off and take a note of them on the paper, and then look back at the model, and then look back at the drawing, and you'll start to get a good sense of whether your proportions are right or not. Okay, that already feels better. And try at this stage also to take notes of kind of like anatomical things. That helps to keep the symmetry as well. So don't just do the very outward features. Take notes of like, here I see essentially where like these cheekbones are, and that needs to be represented on the other side, because humans are supposed to be symmetrical on both sides. Of course, in practice, that is not entirely true, but for our purposes, we will try to keep them symmetrical. And you want to take notes of like, where's the jawbone? So even my model here does not have a very established jawline, but I can still take a note of where the jaw is. It's still obvious to us because good old Velasquez did a very wonderful job painting him. So it is still clear where like those anatomical landmarks are. And if the neck were showing, I would be working on that too at the same point. Because it would just make sure that the anatomy is correct. It would just keep everything in line. And I really do recommend that if you're working, well, for example, if you're making a portrait, but the portrait is a full figure, I would recommend doing this entire system all at once. I wouldn't just do the portrait and then get into establishing the figure. I would do it all at the same time. That way you don't run into... I like to build the whole drawing up at the same time. I find that you avoid a lot of possible errors if you do that, if you just build the whole drawing at the same time. But this is just a bust with like a collar, and I still recommend doing the collar and the shoulders and everything at this stage. But it isn't as imperative as if you were seeing all of the anatomy. In that case, like really take the time with the neck, because it'll just help it'll help establish kind of the character of the figure and make sure that he seems kind of grounded in his body, rather than just a floating head that then you've decided to attach more body to. And so if you see, you may think that I'm shading, but I'm not actually shading. I'm just kind of establishing shadow shapes, which are incredibly useful for gauging proportions and things. It's just another way to divide all the shapes you're seeing. And it can really show off if something's kind of out of proportion, if the shadows don't make sense. And it also helps describe the form and perspective. So I like to do it. And I also find it's a good way for me to kind of set certain features in and decide with very little commitment whether I want them to be there. So for eyes, I especially like to kind of just put a little bit of a value down where I think the iris is, and that'll kind of immediately let me know if that's in the right spot or not, without the investment of putting in like the actual circles, and you're putting in lines that are harder to erase. I also, so right now I'm gauging where the hairline is. I like to draw things in relationship to other things. So I know that on the model, there's this like curved relationship from the brow to the top of the hairline. So I like to kind of follow those things. Those are helpful ways to make sure that things stay in relation to each other. You can also, if you have a hard time with the head of the shape, just draw out, like on your, when you're looking at your model, just draw out like over him, kind of the shape of the cranium and where it lands on him. And then you can just trace that. So here, when I'm tracing that on my model, I see that it's kind of like a circle shape that comes from the bottom of the nose outward. And that'll help me get my shape, make sure it's in the right proportion, more or less, without having to, you know, like spend time measuring, which is always great to save time on that. And then I see that the top of the ear aligns with the top of the eyelid. So I can put that mark down. And of course, you only want to make measurements based on other features if you're really sure of those features. So I feel really confident about these eyes because they're above the halfway landmark. So I know I can, you know, more or less trust this measurement. So I feel confident aligning my ear with that. I also like to always align the ear with how it's related to the bottom of the nose. And in our model, it's a little bit lower than the nose. So just make that mark down there. And keep looking at spaces between things. So right now I'm observing the space between this, and I feel like there's just quite a bit more. There ought to be more space here. And the best way to get good at seeing these, like these kind of proportional relationships, is just to do it. But to do it knowing, like when you practice, know that this is your intention. So draw with the intention of like, okay, I'm gonna really focus on seeing these relationships. And slowly after, after doing some good drills with this, you'll start to get better. Like you will start to see it with a lot more ease. And if you're having a hard time getting shapes, like let's say you don't even feel good about this general large egg shape, try to catch the angles. And you do catching the angles, so you hold out your arm in front of the model and you extend your arm out and you just catch the angle. And remember, you want to keep the pencil parallel to your eye. You don't want to move it forward or backwards. Just keep it parallel to the eye, catch that angle, and then put it in front of your drawing, and you'll be able to compare the angles. You can also just like put the pencil in front, take a note of like, okay, that's at 30 degrees, and then you test here like, okay, is this 30 degrees? Yes, no. And that can kind of help you get certain shapes in that you're just having a really hard time. Like, okay, I feel like proportionally it's fine, but the shapes just really don't feel like the model. It could just be the angles. And those are really easy to measure. And if you're measuring or you feel like you use measuring too much, try to get into the habit of kind of trusting your sense of proportion before you jump into measuring, just because that keeps you training your eye. It keeps you from keeping down measurements that were actually incorrect, because taking measurements is super flawed. You can take really incorrect measurements. And if you just follow your measurement blindly because you feel like, well, it has to be true, it's a measurement, you're missing out from making choices that would really possibly help out your drawing, because your eyes won't lie to you. You'll see if something's off. So just make sure to trust your sense of proportion and like value it and cultivate it, because it's way more valuable than most of the measurements you'll take. And you might have also noticed that I don't really carefully delineate any features. I really like to avoid doing that. I like to kind of arrive at a feature by kind of drawing and massing in all the shapes around it. And that's especially true of the eyes. I really don't like to carefully make a special little lemon shape and then every eyelash. I don't like to do that. I feel like that doesn't work for me. I really like to come at it with all the shapes that are surrounding it. I find that works so much better. I get at everything better. I'm able to stay flexible to fixing things much more easily. And eventually, once you feel good about the drawing, you can go in and have a lot more specificity. I just find that at this point, and really honestly, at almost no point do I get too specific with the like in delineating a feature. At that point, I'm just gonna go into painting. And again, I like to mass in the iris. I feel like that gives you a really good sense of if it's in the right spot or not. It's important to know if it's in the wrong spot right away. And once you mask that iris in, it's just so obvious if it's in the wrong spot, and you kind of want to help make things obvious. You don't want to make it wishy-washy so that you won't know until you're deep in the painting. You want to right away kind of know, like, okay, that didn't work. That's absolutely in the wrong spot. And you can just see, like, right away, if, like, okay, are they cross-eyed now? Are they, like, where is, do these eyes make sense? Are they believable? Are they anatomical? And I can right away tell that this is not right, which is actually a really good thing, because you don't want to carry on in the drawing and not know where it's at. So I right away know that these eyes are not really in the right spot. I'm not believing it. So I have a feeling that I made this eye too close together and also kind of too small. So I looked on the model and I see that this eye kind of starts here, so that's good. And I always like to delineate kind of like the orbital socket. It's you're making like kind of like a bed for the eye. And that just really helps describe it. You're describing kind of where this is all sitting. It gives you a way better idea of if you're off or you're in the right place. And also, and I like to, when I'm working on something that's symmetrical on the face, keep a dialogue between the other part. So especially with the eyebrows, like keep a dialogue, and the eyebrows are a part of the face that won't necessarily be symmetrical. Like you can raise one eyebrow more than the other one, right? But you still want to be in relation. Like even if this model was raising one eyebrow more, I still would want to know what that relationship is to the other eyebrow. That's going to be really valuable information. And I like to mass in shapes wherever I can. So right now there's kind of like, there's the nostril and there's a shadow in here. I want to group that together. I don't want those to be separate things. I'm going to just group them together. That's going to be much easier for me to draw. Okay, recording number 2. I also like massing in kind of and grouping things in shadow shapes because it means that when I want to make alterations, I can shape form with my eraser, which I find is a great tool to do that. And that way you're adding a different element to your drawing that isn't just like additive. You can have some subtractive, which just works your brain in a different way. You're essentially enrolling a bunch of different tools at your disposal, which is great. And try to be as absolutely specific as possible in the shape of the shadow, really in the shape of everything. And what I mean by specific is not detailed. So there is no need to be detailed. Just what I mean by specific is try to be as accurate as possible to what the shape is. So there's nothing detailed about this, but I'm trying the best I can to be really specific and not make it just kind of like a very, I suppose like what would be the opposite of a specific shadow shape would be like, let's take this shadow shape, instead of making it conform to the volume, because it's like it's changing because the shadow is following the shape of the face. What would be a not specific shape is if I simply did a straight diagonal. And now that is absolutely fine right at the beginning when you're first working quickly and you're just gauging really big masses. But you want to start kind of making these shapes quite specific as you go along. It's and that's just gonna really describe the form really beautifully. And of course, it'll help you gauge proportions much better. Like if I had this as just a diagonal, or if I didn't really have the shape be accurate, it would be much harder for me to see if something's going wrong. Or it might seem wrong simply because it's not specific. And if you're wondering why it's important to group shadow masses together, it's just, it makes an abstract shape, and these abstract shapes are a lot easier to gauge. So you're kind of trying to make your job of gauging all these proportions and everything as easy as possible. So right here, I just checked where kind of the end of the shadow created by the mustache aligns with the eye on the model. And I can see that it aligns kind of with the end of the iris. So we're just gonna put that note there. And if it seems like now I'm just fidgeting or doing things that are unnecessary or shading, well, I'm hoping that's not what's happening. I'm altering all these things because I know it's going to help me get to a more accurate drawing. So it is worth it to kind of fiddle and take the time to do this. I'm continuously checking back and comparing my drawing to the model to see if, all the proportions are right. And yeah, we're basically almost there. And when you come to the ear, one, don't skip it. I think a lot of people skip it, and it is an important part of the portrait. And if you have kind of an odd time with it, you kind of don't understand the anatomy, just focus on the angles. Like focus on, see all these angles, I'm putting them in very lightly, and they're not super detailed. But even with just these few lines, I've pretty much described the ear. This is now a believable ear. It's believable in space. It describes what it is. And I didn't need to put very much in there to do that. Okay, so I have made a string of grays, and I did that just by starting out with black and teasing in some white until I got a nice gradient. And the first thing that I like to do when tackling anything is get a few notes down of different things just to get some context in. So I'm going to start out with some notes on the fabric, the background, and then get into the face. That way you're not going in there with absolutely no context and nothing to compare the values that you're using. And for my medium, I'm just using a little bit of oil, as little as I can get away with. And I'm really not mixing it in with anything. There's really no reason to mess around with things for a project like this. And I'm indoors and I don't have that much ventilation. So if I can avoid using solvents, I will. And I'm working on Arch's oil paper, so it's already protected, it's already ready to go. I don't have to worry about priming it or anything. And when you're getting in these initial values, don't compare the value that you see on this white canvas compared to your model. Compare it to what you see on the palette. There's context of this gray. You'll be able to gauge those values much better against a color than against white. Here, all my values are going to seem extremely dark until I get everything in. And you have to kind of like trust your choices and that they're going to lock into place once you have everything covered. And at this stage, you want to have your paint be as dry as possible. If you add too much linseed oil, it's just going to get too slippery, and it's going to make future layers just a lot more difficult to deal with. So if you need the linseed, add it, but don't go crazy. And here you're about to notice that this looks very, very dark. But as soon as I put this value down next to it, it's gonna seem appropriate. See how contextually, now that these two values are together, this value makes sense? All right, and I'm gonna put in some more of this background color here, and then I'll start digging into the figure. And if you feel like you have a really hard time gauging values, whatever you do, once you put all your values together, they don't seem right, they don't fit, definitely you want to do a little bit of research on light logic. And if you're taking my course, then I'm going to talk all about that, so you don't need to worry. But essentially, if I can give it a little primer, light falls in an incredibly predictable and logical way. And as soon as you understand that, it frees up your brain space for so much other work. Because if you don't understand how light works, you're seeing everything with fresh eyes. Everything is just pure observation. There's no conceptualization of things. And that just takes up a lot more brain power. So the more that you can just subconsciously understand what's going on, it'll just make everything so much faster. And then as far as just seeing the value, I think mixing it on your palette and getting used to comparing your palette to your model and getting really good at being accurate at that, that's the best way to practice it. Just make a few paintings or many paintings where you totally don't care about the drawing, all you care about is the values, and just practice mixing values and just do a bunch of paintings quickly where you're just focusing on value until you feel like, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And then eventually you will have to do that with color. Because right now this is a lot easier for us to mix the values because we don't have to think about chroma and color, none of that. So you'll have to do that all over again with color. Post-editing Victoria here. I just wanted to wrap up the video by saying that at this point in the painting, and especially for this kind of exercise, one is really going to be much better suited by just focusing on value and shape. That's really what's going to make the biggest impact. So shape being like the shape of all of kind of the shadows you're making and the lights that you're making. You kind of want to think of everything in typography, and it all has this incredibly specific shape to it. And if you can just be sensitive to that and keep all those shapes in proportion with each other, you're going to get something that's pretty believable. As well as, of course, if the shadow, the value is the correct shade. And if you notice, my lights, they're not very light. I'm trying to keep everything in context, so I'm making sure with that light mask that none of those lights are as light as what's going to be my lightest part in the painting, which is the collar. So if, for example, if I made like the highlight on the forehead, if I made it as light as the light on the collar, that would really flatten out the image, and that would not be what I want. So yeah, just keeping all those things in mind. Anyway, this is kind of where the painting was left at. Thank you for watching this video, and I'm going to be teaching a class soon, so if you want information on that, check the description. Anyway, bye-bye.